They thought humanity was weak after a millennium of peace, a long stretch where the Earth had grown quiet, fragile, almost forgotten in the grand cosmos. We were pegged as a lost species, soft, complacent, broken. The galaxy's great powers, the beings who watched us from distant stars, had written us off before we'd even proven ourselves again, but they had never understood what peace can forge in a man. They had never seen what we bury in our bones, what rises when the world burns and there's no one left but the stubborn to stand. It was the year 3525, and the first war in over 1,000 years was about to begin. Alexei Marov stood on the deck of the Resolute, the newest Earth Defense Fleet cruiser, gazing out into the vastness of space. The black horizon was peppered with distant stars, each one a silent witness to humanity's new chapter. At 42, he carried scars you couldn't see, a childhood torn by chaos long before the peace, losses no man ever spoke about, and a fire inside that no tranquility could ever extinguish. He ran a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with gray, his eyes sharp despite the years. Around him, the fleet was buzzing with tension. Humanity wasn't just defending itself anymore. They were fighting to remind the universe that we were still here, still dangerous, still alive. For 1,000 years, Earth had been a sanctuary. Nations melded into one, old rivalries dissolved into history, and wars became stories told to children. But the cost of peace was complacency. Technology stalled, militaries shrank, people forgot how to fight, until the Drathkai came. No one knew what they wanted. No one understood the twisted motives behind the initial strikes on our outer colonies. Small, brutal raids that left nothing but ash and silence. The Drathkai, an insectoid race, had ruled the sector for centuries. Their fleets were legendary for swift, ruthless conquest. When they struck humanity, the galaxy's powers nodded in quiet agreement. Earth was done, a relic too soft to survive. But Earth had learned in silence. They had rebuilt their forces, refined their technology, and more than that, they had remembered how to fight, not just with weapons, but with heart. Alexei had volunteered on day one of the renewed military buildup, refusing to believe that humanity's era was over. He trained, drilled, and rose through the ranks, his name becoming a symbol of the old warrior spirit reborn. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Now, with the Drathkai Armada advancing on Earth's doorstep, the fleet prepared for its first battle in centuries. "Commander Marov," a voice called behind him. Lieutenant Harris, young but fierce, approached with a tablet in hand. "Scouts report a Drathkai strike force just past the Orion Belt. They're moving fast." Alexei nodded, eyes narrowing. "What's our response?" Fleet Command suggests holding position, waiting for reinforcements. He clenched his jaw. Waiting meant risking the colony worlds. "We don't wait. We strike first. Show them we're not the relic they think we are." Harris hesitated, then nodded. "Understood, sir." The first battle was chaos. The Drathkai hit with precision and cruelty, their ships swarming like locusts. The Resolute was at the center, shields flickering, weapons blazing. Alexei's voice cut through the roar of alarms, steady and commanding, rallying his crew. "Focus fire on their lead ships, don't let them break formation." Explosions rocked the hull, lights flashing red. Men and women around him fought not just for survival, but for a future they'd never known could be so fragile. In the midst of the violence, Alexei caught sight of something impossible. A Drathkai flagship going down under concentrated human fire. A cheer erupted aboard the Resolute, raw and desperate, but the victory was short-lived. More Drathkai ships poured in, their numbers overwhelming. The peace-bred crews struggled with the ferocity of the enemy, losing ships, losing friends. The fleet was pushed back, forced to retreat toward the inner colonies. Days later, in the command center of Earth's capital on Luna, the council met under heavy shadow. Alexei stood before them, his uniform marked by the fresh scars of battle. "You asked for my report," he said, voice steady but low. "We underestimated the Drathkai's brutality and tactics, but more importantly, we underestimated our own strength. Our soldiers fought like men with everything to lose." The council's chairwoman, a woman older than him, but with eyes that still, burned with cold calculation, nodded slowly. "We thought the peace had softened us," she said. "That 1,000 years without war had made us weak. But your fleet shows otherwise." Alexi's gaze didn't waver. "We are not weak. We've just been waiting. And now the galaxy will see what humanity is truly capable of when pushed to the edge." Outside, the stars stretched endless and indifferent, but Earth's defenders were no longer shadows in the dark. They were a storm rising, a force born from 1,000 years of quiet endurance, ready to remind the universe that peace was only the calm before the reckoning. They thought humanity was weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The air in the command center was thick with tension. Outside the reinforced windows, Luna's barren gray plains stretched under the cold gaze of Earth's distant sun. But inside, the room pulsed with urgency and quiet desperation. Alexei Marov stood near a holographic map, watching the flickering blue dots that represented the remnants of Earth's scattered fleets and the fiery red lines marking the Drathkai advance. "Losses are mounting," said Admiral Kestrel, her voice clipped but steady. "Our supply lines are compromised. If the Drathkai cut us off from the outer colonies, those worlds fall, and without them, Earth is vulnerable." Alexei nodded, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "We can't afford to lose them. Those colonies aren't just resources, they're people. Millions of lives depending on us." A younger officer, Lieutenant Miko, leaned forward, eyes bright but strained. "Commander Marov, the new stealth fighters are ready. They've never seen combat, but their design could give us an edge. Hit-and-run tactics, disruption." Alexei turned toward her, weighing the thought. The fleet's technology had been stagnating during the centuries of peace, but in the last decade, engineers had pushed hard, finally advancing weapons and defense systems that could rival the Drathkai's brutal efficiency. "We don't have the luxury of time for long training runs," Alexei said. "But if we have to fight fire with fire, these fighters might be our best chance. We'll deploy them at dawn. Harris, get your pilots ready." Lieutenant Harris nodded and saluted sharply before rushing out. The hours dragged into an uneasy night. Alexei retreated to a small observation room, alone except for the quiet hum of the base's machinery. He stared out at Earth hanging in the distance, blue and green, fragile as a dream. It had been centuries since he'd seen it with his own eyes, and yet it was the thing he'd fought for more than anything. He thought of his childhood, the streets of old Moscow before the peace, when violence and poverty ruled. He'd lost his parents to a war he barely remembered, raised by an uncle who'd taught him to fight with his fists when words failed. That anger had simmered through the peace years, a quiet ember beneath the surface, until the Drathkai came and lit the fire again. The war wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a chance to prove something to the universe and to himself. Dawn came with a thin veil of orange light spilling over Luna's horizon. The stealth fighters launched under Alexei's watchful eyes. The Resolute led the fleet, engines thrumming with power as they surged toward the Drathkai forward positions near the Helios cluster. The stealth fighters moved like shadows, ghost ships weaving through the enemy lines, striking at supply ships and command vessels before vanishing into the dark. The Drathkai roared in frustration, unable to catch the elusive human pilots. Alexei's heart pounded as he watched the battle unfold on the holo display. The tactics were working. The enemy faltered. But this was only the beginning. Suddenly, a warning blared. A massive Drathkai cruiser, bigger than any seen before, emerged from hyperspace behind the fleet's left flank. Its armor shimmered with an energy field unlike anything Earth scientists had encountered. "Shield generators report," Alexei barked. "Overload at 70%, sir. It won't hold long," came the reply. The Drathkai ship unleashed a pulse wave, a shock that knocked out communications and sensors across half the fleet. Ships drifted helpless, exposed. "Damage report." Alexei's voice cracked. Under the pressure, several vessels lost power, were taking heavy casualties, Harris shouted from the comms. Alexei gritted his teeth, anger and fear twisting inside him. The Drathkai had learned. They had adapted faster than anyone expected. Focus all fire on that cruiser, he commanded. If we don't take it down, we lose this battle. The fleet rallied desperately. Human pilots pushed their ships beyond limits. Laser cannons flared, missiles streaked, but the cruiser's shield absorbed the assault with terrifying efficiency. Alexei ordered the Resolute closer, its plasma cannons targeting the cruiser's energy nodes. The ship shuddered under the concentrated fire, but still it held. In the chaos, Alexei received a call from the Resolute's tactical officer. "Sir, a boarding party detected on the aft hull. Drathkai infiltrators." His stomach tightened. This was the nightmare scenario. The enemy getting inside their ship, sabotaging systems, killing from within. "Seal all bulkheads. Deploy security teams," Alexei ordered. "Harris, get over here now." Moments later, Harris burst into the control room, breathless. "They're cutting through the outer decks fast. If they reach the command core," Alexei slammed his fist on the console. "Not on my watch." The boarding fight was brutal and intimate, a deadly contrast to the massive fleet battle outside. Alexei personally led a security squad through narrow corridors, fighting Drathkai warriors with pulse rifles and close combat weapons. The Drathkai were relentless, their claws tearing through bulkheads, their shrieks echoing in the confined spaces. But Alexei's men fought with desperate fury, a storm of human rage fueled by the stakes they faced. As they cleared each section, Alexei felt the weight of every loss, friends cut down, the smell of blood mixing with burnt circuitry. The war was no longer distant or abstract. It was raw and close and terrifying. Back on the bridge, the battle reached its tipping point. The Resolute's crew finally managed to overload the cruiser's energy field, causing a massive explosion that rocked the Drathkai fleet. The enemy began to retreat, their lines breaking under the human counterattack. Breathing hard, Alexei allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. "We held," he said, voice hoarse. But he knew this was only the start. The Drathkai would come back stronger, and Earth's survival depended on more than just courage. It depended on learning, adapting, and fighting with everything they had. Later that night, in a small, quiet room on Luna, Alexei sat alone, staring at a worn photo tucked in his jacket, a picture of his parents smiling on a day before the world fell apart. He touched the edges lightly. They thought humanity was weak, that peace had broken us. But in the shadows of loss, we had built a fire they could never snuff out. And now it was time to show them the true strength of a people who refused to die. The war had changed everything, but nothing changed faster than the way a man felt in the quiet moments after the battle near the Helios cluster. Alexei Marov found himself caught between the roar of combat and the suffocating silence of doubt. The fleet had won, yes, but the cost had been brutal, and the Drathkai had shown they weren't just savage invaders. They were cunning, relentless, evolving. Every victory tasted bitter. The fleet gathered on Luna's orbital station, a sprawling fortress of metal and light carved into the dark side of the moon. It was both a sanctuary and a prison, the last stronghold before Earth itself. But the people inside carried the weight of the war in their eyes, the fear, the loss, and the burning need to fight back harder. Alexei walked through the corridors, the hum of machinery blending with the low murmur of voices. He passed squads of soldiers preparing for deployment, technicians hunched over glowing consoles, and medics tending to the wounded. Everywhere, the tension was thick enough to cut, with a knife. In one corner, a group of young pilots laughed, trying to hide their nerves behind bravado. Alexei's gaze lingered on them. Boys barely out of their teens, thrust into a conflict older and crueler than any storybook war they'd grown up hearing about. He saw himself in them once, before the years had carved lines into his face and taught him how fragile life really was. "Commander Marov," a voice called, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Dr. Elena Voss, the lead engineer behind the new stealth fighters and weapon systems. Her face was tired but determined, her hands stained with grease and circuit dust. "Doctor?" Alexei nodded. "What's the status?" "We're pushing the limits," she said, voice low. "The stealth fighters are holding up well, but the Drathkai's energy shields are adapting. They're changing frequency patterns faster than we can counter. It's like fighting a ghost." Alexei frowned. "We need a way to disrupt those shields. Something The Drathkai won't expect. Elena glanced at him, eyes sharp. I have an idea. A prototype pulse disruptor. It's risky. Could fry our own systems if not calibrated perfectly, but it might just crack their shields long enough for a decisive strike. Risky or not, it might be our best shot, Alexei said. Get me a test run. The next days were a blur of preparation and exhaustion. The fleet commanders debated strategy, weighing each option with grim seriousness. Earth's colonies were still under threat, and every delay cost lives. Alexei spent long hours in the tactical room, studying enemy patterns, looking for weaknesses in their cold, alien logic. The Drathkai weren't just brutal. They were patient, precise. They hit hard, then retreated, wearing the humans down like a storm eroding the shore. But Alexei refused to let that happen. One evening, as the twin moons of Mars rose over the red horizon, visible through the station's observation window, Alexei found himself alone with Elena. The hum of the station was a soft backdrop. You carry a lot on your shoulders, she said quietly. He gave a half smile, a ghost of humor in his tired eyes. Not just me. All of us. Elena nodded. You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who fought wars no one remembers but shaped the world. Then I'm honored to be in such company, Alexei said. They shared a rare moment of silence, two people burdened by the future but connected in their resolve. The day of the next assault arrived with a tension so thick it felt like the air itself would crack. The fleet gathered at the edge of Drathkai-controlled space, the pulse disruptors loaded onto the stealth fighters, the new weapon systems tested and retested. Alexei's orders were clear. Hit the Drathkai supply lines hard and fast. If the disruptor worked, it could turn the tide. The stealth fighters launched, sleek and silent as shadows, slipping through enemy defenses. Alexei watched the holographic display tracking every movement. Then came the moment. The pulse disruptor activated. A wave of strange energy pulsed outward from the fighters, and for the first time Drathkai shields flickered, their energy, barriers destabilizing. The human fleet surged forward, firing with brutal precision. Enemy ships exploded in a cascade of fire. Cheers erupted on the Resolute. For the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving, they were winning, but the Drathkai were far from finished. In the midst of victory, a chilling broadcast cut through the comm channels. It was a voice, cold and mechanical, speaking in broken but understandable common, Earth's adopted interstellar tongue. Humans, it said, you have awakened a sleeping giant. We are the Drathkai sovereignty. Your defiance will end. Surrender or be annihilated. The broadcast was a warning and a promise. The Drathkai had sent more ships, larger fleets, their weapons deadlier, and their tactics more ruthless. Alexei's stomach turned. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a war for the soul of humanity. Back on Luna, the council convened again, their faces drawn and pale. The chairman, a man named General Harland, looked at Alexei with something close to respect mixed with weariness. You and your fleet have given us hope, he said. But the enemy grows stronger. We need a new plan. Alexei met his gaze. Then we give them something they won't expect. We fight like humanity always has. Unyielding, unbreakable. Harland hesitated, then nodded. Prepare the defenses. Mobilize every available ship. This war will not end until one of us is wiped from the stars. That night, Alexei found himself standing on the observation deck staring at Earth's fragile blue glow. The weight of command was crushing, but beneath it all burned something fierce, an unshakable belief that humanity could rise. They thought we were weak after 1,000 years of peace. They were about to see the truth. The war had dragged on, longer than anyone had expected. The Drathkai sovereignty wasn't just a brutal enemy. They were a force of unrelenting strategy and adaptability. Each victory humanity won was met with an even fiercer counterstrike, their fleets evolving faster than the scientists could analyze. Alexei Marov felt the weight of it all in his bones. Months on the front lines, countless battles, and every day the same question haunted him. How much more could humanity endure before it broke? But breaking wasn't an option. Not for him, not for the millions who had placed their hope and lives in his hands. The Luna Command Center was tense beyond measure. The walls lined with screens showing tactical data flickered with the steady pulse of information. The Resolute had just returned from a brutal skirmish near the Vesta asteroid belt, battered but victorious. Ships were being repaired, crews exhausted but readying for the next engagement. Alexei sat in the war room staring at the holographic projection of the Drathkai fleet movements. A cluster of enemy vessels was massing near Earth's outer defenses, preparing for what intelligence predicted to be a decisive strike. Commander Morov, Lieutenant Harris reported, the Drathkai are coordinating a multi-vector assault. They're aiming to overwhelm our shield grid simultaneously. Alexei's jaw tightened. If their attack breaches our defenses, the outer colonies fall, and Earth becomes exposed. There was a brief silence before Elena Voss spoke up. We have new, experimental tech, automated drone swarms that can be deployed from our cruisers. They're untested in combat but could provide crucial support. Alexei glanced at her, weighing the risks. Deploy the drones. Use them to create defensive buffers at critical points. Preparation was swift. Crews worked around the clock to retrofit the cruisers with the new drone bays. The air was thick with anticipation and exhaustion. Everyone knew the stakes. If this battle went wrong, it might be the last hope slipping through humanity's fingers. Alexei moved among the crew, offering what words of encouragement he could. His presence was steadying, a reminder that even in the darkest moments they fought for something worth dying for. The battle began at dawn. The Drathkai assault was brutal and precise. Swarms of enemy fighters darted through space like venomous wasps, while larger cruisers unleashed torrents of energy that strained the human shields. The automated drone swarms launched from the Resolute and other vessels, moving in coordinated waves to intercept attackers. For a moment, hope flickered. These small machines were proving effective, disrupting enemy formations and buying precious time. But the Drathkai adapted quickly. They deployed specialized units designed to disable the drones with electromagnetic pulses, turning humanity's new advantage into a vulnerability. In the thick of the chaos, Alexei's voice was everywhere over, the comms steady and commanding. Keep formation. Protect the drones. Focus fire on the disruptors. The Resolute took heavy fire. The bridge shook violently as shields flickered under the strain. Alexei gripped the console, sweat dripping down his forehead. Suddenly, the alarms screamed. A massive missile salvo launched from a hidden Drathkai cruiser locking onto the Resolute's engines. Evasive maneuvers, Alexei shouted. Divert all power to rear thrusters. The ship lurched, narrowly avoiding the incoming missiles that exploded in a blaze behind them. The near miss sent a shockwave through the crew, a stark reminder of how close death was. After hours of grueling combat, the Drathkai began to pull back, their formations breaking. The automated drones, though battered and reduced in number, had made a difference. Human ships had held the line, but the cost was devastating. Several cruisers were lost, hundreds of lives gone in an instant. Alexei stood silently on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the wreckage float in the void. The war was no longer a distant threat, it was a bleeding wound. Later, in a debriefing room, the council gathered, exhaustion etched into every face. General Harland looked at Alexei with a mixture of pride and concern. You held the line, but for how long? The Drathkai's resources are vast, they will come again. Alexei met his gaze, the fire in his eyes undimmed. We will be ready. We have to be. Elena Voss added quietly. We're working on new tech, better weapons, stronger defenses. But it will take time. Time. The one thing the war wasn't giving them. That night, Alexei found himself walking alone on Luna's surface. The barren landscape stretched endlessly, cold and silent. The earth hung above him, a fragile blue marble glowing in the blackness. He thought about the faces lost in the battles, the young pilots, the engineers, the medics, all fighting for a future they might never see. He clenched his fists, feeling the ache of it all deep inside. They thought humanity was weak after 1,000 years of peace. But humanity fought with a fierceness born of survival, of hope and defiance. and Alexei Marov would carry that fight to the stars, no matter the cost. It was quiet after the battle. Too quiet. Even on a space station filled with thousands of soldiers, officers, and technicians, the silence after heavy losses carried a weight that pressed on everyone's chest like an invisible hand. Alexei Marov stood in the infirmary, watching a young pilot being stitched up by a medic with trembling fingers. The pilot's name was Thomas. He was barely 20, one of the newer recruits from the Europa colony. His face was pale, not just from blood loss, but from the kind of fear that lingers long after the shooting stops. Thomas met Alexei's eyes and forced a smile through split lips. "We held them back, didn't we, sir?" Alexei nodded. "You did more than that. You saved lives today. It wasn't just a comfort. It was the truth. These kids who'd grown up during peacetime, who'd never imagined holding a rifle or flying a fighter, were turning into warriors. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. That was what this war demanded." The command center was somber when Alexei returned. Debriefings had become a routine of reporting casualty lists, analyzing the wreckage, and trying to find new tactics before the next wave hit. But this time, there was something different. Elena Voss stood by the main tactical display, her fingers tapping rapidly across the console. Her face was drawn, her hair pulled back messily, but her eyes burned with a strange, fierce light. "I think I found something," she said without looking up. Alexei stepped closer. "What is it?" "The Drathkai cruiser we destroyed during the last assault. It left behind some strange energy readings. Not just residual from the explosion, something else. I had the black box fragments scanned, and I think they're using a type of subspace relay tech we've never seen before." Alexei frowned. "Explain." "They're not just jumping from one sector to another. They're syncing their ships in real time, coordinating attacks across light years like they're in the same room. That's how they're so damn fast. How they're always a step ahead. They're connected." Alexei's pulse picked up. "If we sever that connection, they lose that coordination advantage." Elena nodded. "They'll still be deadly, but they'll be fighting in the dark just like we are." A beat of silence passed. "You have a plan?" Alexei said. She nodded. "A prototype virus designed for alien relay networks. It could disrupt the Drathkai communications across an entire sector. If we can upload it into their relay system, we might cripple their fleet movements for weeks. Or provoke a full-scale retaliation," Alexei said. "Or that." Alexei took a long breath. "We'll do it anyway." The mission was simple on paper. Get close to the Drathkai relay hub deep in Sector 17 Delta, deploy the virus, and get out alive. But nothing was ever simple in this war. The Resolute couldn't do it alone. A covert insertion would require a smaller ship, one fast enough to evade detection, but powerful enough to hold its own if things went wrong. Alexei handpicked the crew. Himself, Harris's pilot, Elena to handle the upload, and a small squad of combat specialists for protection. The ship they chose was the Black Fang, a stealth corvette retrofitted with top-of-the-line cloaking tech. It wasn't meant for long-term engagement. It was a ghost, designed to slip in and out without a trace. As the crew prepped for departure, Alexei stood by the loading ramp, feeling the old weight settle on his shoulders. This mission could turn the tide, or it could end him. Elena approached, her voice low. "If this works, it buys us time, maybe even changes the whole damn war." "And if it doesn't?" he asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Black Fang launched under the cover of a meteor shower, using the interference to mask its departure. They drifted in the cold silence of deep space for hours, crossing into enemy territory with only the faint hum of the ship's systems and their own breathing to remind them they were still alive. The Drathkai relay hub hung in orbit over a dying star, its structure like a twisted cathedral of black metal and burning lights. Dozens of cruisers patrolled the system, their movements synchronized like a dance, fast, brutal, perfect. Alexei studied the readings. "We can't get too close." "Elena, how far can you transmit the virus?" 25 clicks, she replied, "but only if the signal stays clean. One power surge and we're toast." Harris kept the ship steady while Elena began the upload sequence. Every second stretched like an hour. Sweat trickled down Alexei's neck. One mistake, one flicker of energy, and the Drathkai would descend like wolves. Halfway through the upload, the ship's sensors picked up a spike, an enemy cruiser veering toward them. "They've spotted us," Harris said. "Evasive maneuvers," Alexei ordered. "Elena, how long?" 30 seconds. Outside the viewport, the cruiser loomed closer, weapons priming. Alexei made a snap decision. "Harris, fire countermeasures, draw them away." "What about the signal?" "We hold our position. We don't leave until it's done." The ship shook violently as a barrage of plasma rounds grazed the hull. The shields flickered. Elena clung to her console, fingers racing over the commands. And seconds. Another blast rocked the ship. Smoke filled the corridor behind them. A console exploded, throwing sparks. Alexei gritted his teeth. "Come on, damn it!" Then Elena shouted, "Upload complete! Get us out of here!" Alexei yelled. Harris punched the thrusters, the ship diving into a narrow asteroid belt nearby. The Drathkai cruiser gave chase, but the Black Fang's cloaking field flickered back online just long enough to mask their exit vector. They jumped to hyperspace, just as a second volley scorched the edge of their hull. Back on Luna, the effects were immediate. Across the galaxy, Drathkai formations faltered. Patrol routes grew sloppy. Attacks lost their timing. Humanity had done the impossible, cut the strings on the puppet master. Alexei stood before the council days later, still wearing the scorched uniform from the mission. "The relay disruption won't last forever," he said, "but it's a window. We strike now and we strike hard. We bring the war to them before they can adapt again." General Harlan looked at him long and hard. "You've earned your victories, Commander, but this will be a campaign like nothing we've seen." Alexei's voice didn't waver. "Then let them see it. Let the galaxy remember what humanity does when we fight for everything we have." Later that night, Alexei stood alone, looking once again at the Earth through the viewport. The blue marble was distant, beautiful, and so damn vulnerable. They had thought humanity was weak. They had no idea what we were capable of when we had something to fight for. It began like thunder rolling across the stars. Humanity's counteroffensive was the most aggressive campaign launched in over 1,000 years. For the first time in the war, Earth wasn't defending. It was attacking. Fleet after fleet launched from Luna, Mars, Europa, and the deep orbital yards beyond Neptune. The blackness of space came alive with drive signatures and war chants. Ships bore new markings, scars and names of fallen friends, and the pilots wore them like armor. The virus Alexei and his team had delivered into the Drathkai relay network had fractured their hive mind coordination. They weren't gone. They weren't weak, but they were slower. And now they bled. Alexei stood aboard the Resolute, now refitted and upgraded with the newest weaponry Earth had. Its hull still bore scorch marks from past battles, and its corridors echoed with the quiet hum of a ship that had known too much war. But it was ready, just like him. "Status?" he asked, eyes fixed on the screen before him. "Strike teams have landed on Taros and Karatin 4. Resistance is heavy, but the enemy is disorganized," Harris reported from the side console. "Any sign they're regaining control of their network?" "Not yet, but they're adapting. We estimate 2, maybe 3 weeks, before their coordination returns." Alexei nodded. "Then we break their back before that." This was the window. And humanity had never been better at doing the impossible when the clock was ticking. The campaign took them deep into what had once been forbidden space. Drathkai claimed systems filled with scorched planets, broken moons, and orbital stations twisted into monuments of domination. What they found was worse than what they'd feared. Entire species had been wiped out, worlds reduced to resource mines, stripped to their cores. The Drathkai didn't conquer to rule. They conquered to erase, to consume. On Sheer 9, Alexei and his ground team landed amidst black sand dunes and glassed cities. The air was toxic, the sun bloated and dying. They'd come to destroy a forward, relay base, but what they found was a graveyard. Thousands, millions of skeletal remains. Not human, not Drathkai, something else. Elena stood beside him, staring at the mounds. They've been doing this for centuries. Alexi's voice was hollow. We weren't their first mistake, just the first to hit back. The thought sat in their bones, like lead. 2 days later, the fleet engaged what remained of the Drathkai's Third Armada in the Dresa Expanse, a belt of shattered asteroids and magnetic storms. The enemy was desperate, more aggressive. Their movements clumsy but violent. It was the bloodiest fight yet. The Resolute took the vanguard position, its plasma cannons lighting the void. Drones buzzed around like hornets, intercepting kamikaze fighters. Harris flew like a madman, dodging debris and missile locks with reckless genius. Inside the ship, the crew fought not just with their hands but their hearts. They were winning, but winning hurt. A missile struck the aft hangar. Fires broke out on Deck 12. Half a squad was lost in seconds. Another cruiser, the Caledonia, was split in two by a ramming Drathkai battleship. The human screams over the comms were the kind that stayed in your gut forever. Alexei didn't blink. He couldn't afford to. Focus fire on their command ship, he barked. If it falls, the rest scatter.